Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be going over my top 10 tribal councils from Survivor US, up to Survivor Edge of Extinction. And to be honest, a lot of these tribals do come from more modern seasons. While I did make a short list of all the tribals that I was even considering for this video, and there were some older season tribal councils in there, I just couldn't justify putting them high enough to where they would rank in this top 10. Now, obviously, these are my personal choices. I personally prefer tribal councils that have some really interesting gameplay, but I also wanted to pick tribals that had some intrigue throughout the entire tribal, not just the result. So there's tribals like the Baylor Blindside, the Tyson Blindside from Heroes vs. Villains, that I didn't put on the list because I feel like the tribal before the actual vote reveal isn't particularly interesting. And on the opposite end of that, there's tribals like the Trish Boot in Cagayan or the Margaret Tribal in Guatemala that had fantastic deliberations before the vote, but the actual vote results themselves are just kind of meh. And with so many tribals here for Survivor US, I wanted to make sure that each tribal that made the list was something that was really great all around. Now, there are some other tribals that didn't quite make the list that I thought would when I was initially making the list. Things like the Three Amigos tribal, the Garrett Blindside from Cagayan, the JT Boot from Heroes vs. Villains. And to be honest, the West Nail Blindside from San Juan del Sur is kind of one that I kind of forgot about when I was making the short list. I didn't realize it until afterwards. So that's not on this list here, though to be honest, it probably would have made the list somewhere around the 8, 9, 10 spot, but it is what it is. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's just get started with number 10. At number 10, we have the most recent tribal on the list, and it comes from Survivor Edge of Extinction. We have the final 11 tribal council where Julia goes home after a really chaotic tribal deliberation. And as I said earlier, maybe this tribal wouldn't have made the list if I remembered about the Keith Nail tribal beforehand, but oh well. So, coming into this tribal, we were setting up for a Kelly blindside, though David's name was also on the chopping block. But that tribal, Julia's game completely goes downhill, where she gets in a fight with Rick Devins, which leads to Rick trying to get Ron and Julie to flip, causing everyone to get up and discuss the plan openly at tribal council. And this was complete chaos. This is probably the most chaotic tribal on this list, as people are just walking all over the place, getting in groups, discussing openly at tribal, just talking about their plans out in the open. It's really just such a strange thing that Survivor even allowed this to happen, as I do feel like this sets a bad precedent for the future. But through all this, we did get some really great moments throughout. We had David and Kelly reuniting after being on separate sides strategically for a while at that point. We had Julie screaming that she's jumping ship and running into David's lap. We have Ron saying Victoria's name right in front of her and then Victoria freaking out. I think this is a really fun tribal just because there's a lot of fun little moments here. But the reason why it's here at number 10 is because I don't think it lives up to its potential from a gameplay perspective. To be honest, I think if none of this even happened, this probably would have been an even more interesting tribal. Because again, coming into this tribal council, we were set up for a Kelly Wentworth blindside with the other votes going on David. We're coming into this tribal, Rick and David were already planning on playing the idol on themselves, meaning if the votes against David get nullified here, more than likely Kelly knows that she's going to get votes, so more than likely she plays her idol as well, which probably would have led to a 0-0 tie, and who knows what happens at that point. I mean, it is final 11, so it's very hard to get a rock draw out of this, but it would have still been an insane tribal at that point. Instead, we get a near unanimous vote out of Julia, which I just kind of felt was anticlimactic from a gameplay perspective, even though I think from a narrative perspective, to see Julia's game go completely downhill within the course of one tribal council is pretty fun. It is still very good tribal council, but to be honest, the West Nail one probably would have beat it if I thought about it beforehand. And to be honest, this does fit into that category I was talking about earlier, where I was saying in these tribals that had great deliberation sections, but didn't really have the best vote outs. That's kind of what this is, but I do feel like this is probably the best of those. Where again, deliberation is so crazy that I feel like that was enough to put it at the very bottom of this list. Now we're moving on. Number 9, we got a tribal council from Survivor. Go wrong. We have the final 9 tribal council where Debbie Wanner gets blindsided out of the game in a 4-3-2 vote. So coming into this round, Jason, Scott, and Ty are on the outs, but they have 2 idols between the 3 of them that can't combine into a super idol. So no matter what, during this round, none of them are going home. So the majority alliance of 6 that were there were initially going to split the votes between Scott and Ty. But Julia started to get a lot closer to Scott, Jason, and Ty, trying to flip over to them, causing Aubrey to get sketched out and create this plan to blindside Julia. But when Julia wins immunity, that plan gets messed up. But at the same time, Aubrey still knows that the minority there still has idols, so the plan is to flush them out. And with so limited options, the best option on the board is Debbie, who is someone who is very volatile and someone who wouldn't go along with Aubrey's plans. So coming into Tribal, the plan was already to get rid of Debbie. The plan was the 4-3-2 vote that was enacted, but we had a fun ride getting there once we get the Tribal. So now the first half of the deliberation at Tribal is just kind of fine, but it gets a lot more exciting once Ty and Jason both pull out their idols in front of the entire tribe. Jason, Scott, and Ty really make a show out of this. It really feels like they're having a lot of fun doing this. This causes the quote-unquote majority to go start whispering to each other again. This is before people start getting out of their chairs in the middle of Tribal. But to be honest, nothing really comes out of this, but it's still really fun on the initial watch to see that this is kind of like a live Tribal, even though it really wasn't. So then we get the votes cast, and then Jason and Scott get up to play rock, paper, scissors, decide who's going to get the idol. Scott wins, but who really cares? They hand it over to Ty. And obviously this is all just for show. It didn't really matter. Obviously they had the super idol. If one of them got voted out, they would have played it for them at that point. Again, obviously we know what happens next Tribal, but whatever. So the votes come out, and it's a 4-3-2 vote where Debbie goes home, which is perfect for this minority if only they were able to stay together, as now they're coming into the final 8 with their super idol, which guarantees that one of them is not going home, and also guarantees that at the final 7 they would only need to flip over one other person to go on their side. And with Julia already starting to side towards them, they pretty much had the game on lock if only they could stay together at that point. But obviously they didn't. But still, it's a fantastic final Tribal at the end. Again, seeing Debbie getting blindsided is really fun. She was a great character that season. Now we're moving on to number 8. We have a Tribal from Survivor, Cambodia. We have the final 6 Tribal, the no votes Tribal, where Kimmy kind of gets voted out of the game. Came into this round with Kelly and Keith on the outs, where Jeremy, Spencer, Tasha, and Kimmy were in the majority. However, Kimmy knew that she was 4th, and even if she wasn't 4th, she probably wasn't going to win if she got to the end with someone like Jeremy. So she decides to flip and orchestrates this 3-2-1 plan with Kelly and Keith. However, Spencer and Tasha know this is what she's doing, so they're able to convince Jeremy to not split the vote. Instead of a 3-2-1, we get the Tribal and we have a 3-3 vote. So like the last Tribal I talked about, the first half of this Tribal deliberation, this Tribal is kind of just mundane. It really doesn't get interesting until Spencer pretty much declares to the entire Tribal that him, Tasha, and Jeremy are not splitting the votes. And this causes Kimmy to freak out, as obviously she knows her plans in smithereens. But yeah, we get to the votes. They come in 3-3 for Jeremy and Kelly. However, both of them have idols, so they both play them. Nullified every vote. And from a gameplay perspective, this is terrible for Kelly, by the way, where Kelly knows that she's going to be playing the idol anyway. So I don't understand why she didn't just throw her vote on someone else. Again, kind of a similar thing to this minority vote split that's been coming up more recently in Survivor, where if you know you have an idol that you plan on playing correctly, then why not split the minority vote to avoid one of their idols as well? Which I feel like this is the first time that this sort of idea came to my mind. Just kind of disappointed that Kelly Wentworth didn't do the same thing, because that would have obviously greatly benefited her game, and she would have possibly won the game with that move. So after no votes, we have another deliberation where Kimmy is pretty much outed at that point, and then Jeremy's acting really cocky. It's really fun to watch. He's like skipping this voting booth. And we come in with another tie. We have 3 votes Tasha, 3 votes Kimmy. But we get to the point where, because Kelly and Jeremy played their idols, they're safe. Spencer has immunity, he's safe. Kimmy and Tasha, if they were to go to rocks, they're safe. So the only person that can go home is Keith. So essentially, this sort of resurgence automatically loses here. Essentially, whichever side won immunity in this Tribal was going to win out, as the only 2 options to even be taken out at this point would have been either Kimmy or Keith, as Spencer and Jeremy had no incentive to flip to vote out Tasha. But yeah, we get Kimmy voted out unanimously. Again, I thought this was a fun Tribal Council. Very eventful Tribal Council. But for me, it doesn't really have as satisfying of an ending as many of the ones that we're going to be talking about later, as I feel like Kimmy pretty much going out by default is just kind of anticlimactic to me. It's very similar to how I felt about Advantage Get In, and why that tribal's not going to be on this list is because Suri just getting taken out in default is not particularly interesting to me. I think it would have been much more fun for some sort of blindside or something, but whatever. That's why this is at number 8 though. So now we're moving on. Number 7, we have a tribal from Survivor. Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers. We have the Lauren boot at the final 7, where Ben single-handedly idles Lauren out of the game. To be honest, this tribal actually initially started at number 10. I thought this was going to be at the bottom of the list. However, obviously I rewatched all these tribals before doing this video, and this was a great tribal. I mean, it really was a great tribal. I mean, the result itself is kind of and that's kind of why it's still this low, but the tribal before that is fantastic. Now, unlike the last 2 tribals that we've been talking about, there's really no downtime in this tribal. It really just starts instantly. It's consistently entertaining the entire way through. Now, coming into this tribal, Ben had an idol, and he was in the majority alliance before this vote. His alliance had a majority of 4-3. However, his alliance started to turn on him due to thinking of him as a big threat. However, at the same time, Chrissy, Ryan, and Mike were on the outs and were considering on bringing him in to take over the majority. But to stop that from happening, Lauren, Ashley, and Devin decided to hand Mike half of Lauren's idol to build trust with him. And also, Lauren actually had an extra vote. So if they could have gone through this one tribal here by getting rid of Ben, they would have been able to dominate the game from that point forward. Starting off with tribal right away, we have Devin pretty much saying that Lauren and Ashley are his alliance, excluding Ben, causing Ben to get upset. He starts arguing with Lauren, as the two had been pretty much targeting each other all day at that point. And we get Lauren telling everyone that she left her extra vote at camp, and I don't get why people actually believed this. It seems like they actually believed it because they did end up voting out Ben, which it's really dumb for Christy, Ryan, and Mike to be voting out Ben at this tribal, but whatever, we'll talk about later. But we also have Ben pulling out a fake idol, and also we have Mike throwing the half idol that Lauren gave to him into the fire, which is such a ridiculous scene. And I mean, really, it's just also terrible gameplay from Lauren to even give him the half idol to begin with, but whatever. And it's at this point where Chrissy and Ryan decide to vote out Lauren, but at the same time, Devin gets up and goes over to Mike and is able to convince Mike to vote for Ben, which leads to everyone voting for Ben. But obviously, Ben has an idol. He gets up, plays it, nullifies every vote at this tribal except for his, and he votes out Lauren. Which, again, this tribal, I mean, I pretty much have a problem with it gameplay-wise from almost everyone here. Again, why are Chrissy, Ryan, and Mike voting out Ben? Especially because they know Lauren has an extra vote. And obviously it ends up going in their favor because Ben idles out Lauren. If they had successfully gotten Ben out, they would have come into the final 6 in a 3-3 tie, but with Lauren's extra vote, they would have won out. And they didn't have any idols or anything, so it really makes no sense why they're going along with this plan, outside of just thinking Ben is this massive threat. Then I also have a problem with why didn't Devin, Lauren, and Ashley vote for someone other than Ben? The thing about this situation is that if Mike, Chrissy, and Ryan weren't on their side, they were screwed anyway. So why didn't they put their votes on someone like Chrissy or someone like Ryan or someone like Mike, where if Ben plays his idol, it's their votes that are sending the person home? Because if Ben doesn't have an idol, it becomes a tie and they would have the votes to get him out on the revote. So I don't get why they didn't do that, considering it would have saved Lauren. And again, if the others weren't voting for Ben anyway, they were screwed anyway. So why not just go for this plan? Now, the reason this tribal isn't higher for me is because, again, I feel like the vote result itself is just kind of anticlimactic. I mean, we kind of knew Lauren was going home once Ben successfully played his idol. I mean, Lauren's even shown picking up her bag like way before her vote's actually revealed. So again, it becomes so apparent that she's going home. I do feel like that takes away some of the luster from this tribal, even though everything before it is fantastic. But again, the tribals we'll be talking about in a little bit are also fantastic, so that's kind of why this is here at number 7. Now moving on, number 6, we actually have the earliest tribal council that will be on this list. And, I mean, yeah, this shows how recent these tribals are. But we have the final 10 tribal council of Survivor Philippines, where Jeff Kent gets blindsided in a 5-4-1 vote. Now, Survivor Philippines was actually the first season that I watched live after returning to Survivor. After a, 15 season break. And I remember this being the first tribal council that I watched after I came back that I was truly amazed at. So coming into this round, we had 5 original Tendang members, 3 original Calabao, and 2 original Mat Sing. So the Calabao and Mat Sing people decided to come together, become a 5, and they thought they could pick up Scoopin to become a 6-person majority alliance that votes out Pete. While the Tendang alliance was targeting Jeff Kent after Penner had won immunity. But along the way, Lisa reveals to the Tendang members that Malcolm has an idol and unsuccessfully tries to get rid of him. And obviously Malcolm hears of this, and then once we get to Tribal, that's literally the first thing that pretty much happens. Malcolm calls out Lisa for her trying to get rid of him, and she admits it. We then have Abby keep on talking about her alliances and really messing up all the time, where she keeps on excluding people like Malcolm and Scoopin, who are the people that she needs to vote with her during this vote. And then we also have Malcolm pulling out his idol as a bluff to the entire tribe, which is a fantastic moment, which leads to Jeff saying, hey, does anyone else want to reveal they have an idol? And all of a sudden, Abby just brings out her idol too for no reason. And at the last second, we have Penner trying to regroup everyone, trying to get the Calabao, Mat Sing people back together and Scoopin. But then we get to the votes. Malcolm and Abby do not play their idols. And then we get Scoopin flipping back to Tendang, which would be whatever. I mean, that makes it a 5-5 vote instead of a 6-4, but it's not the underworld, right? But no, Penner, the person who at the last second was making sure everyone was together, decides to put his vote on Abby, making it a 5-4 to 1 vote. Now, I know Penner claims that the reason he did this is because he had like some sort of deal with Pete, and he wanted to preserve Pete's jury vote by voting for Abby. And obviously he did that because he thought Scoopin was with them, so he thought it was going to be 5-4-1 the other way, where Pete goes home. But it isn't, and Jeff Kent gets taken out. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's a fantastic tribal. It's really one that I, like, to be honest, I considered moving up a bit more. I think it's one of the first tribals that really feels alive during the vote. I mean, there's a couple other before this. I mean, I think the Danielle boot in Heroes vs. Villains comes to mind right away. But it did really feel like a lot of things were up in the air during this tribal, and I thought it was just a lot of fun. Now moving on to number 5, we have a tribal from Survivor, Blood vs. Water. And I feel like this one should be pretty obvious. I mean, obviously it's the final 6 rock draw. And I love this tribal so much. I mean, to be honest, the results themselves, like, it's not that great. I mean, obviously they go to rocks, which is great. But the result of the rock draw is Katie getting taken out, which doesn't really change the trajectory of the game. It was already heading towards Tyson, Monica, and Jervis controlling the rest of the game anyway. And this just solidifies that. There's so many fun moments from the tribal before it. So coming into tribal, we had a 4-2 split where Hayden and Katie were on the outs. Tyson, Jervis, Monica, and Sierra were the majority, and while it was very clear from the outside that Sierra was number 4, she didn't realize it yet. But when we get to tribal, both Monica and Jervis start making a lot of mistakes, especially Jervis. I mean, they keep on mentioning Sierra as 4th, which is really funny. I mean, even like Jervis literally does a count of every person in the alliance and literally puts Sierra at number 4 still. And Hayden does a really masterful job of getting Sierra to realize that she's number 4, using the words of Monica and Jervis against them, and is successfully able to get her to flip. So obviously Sierra flipping is a really fun moment, but there's some other really great moments during this tribal as well. I mean, we have the Russell Feathers moment, where Hayden and Tyson get in this really dumb argument in the middle of Hayden pretty much pleading for his life. We also get Jervis yelling out from the voting booth. We get Tyson not playing his idol, which is still ridiculous to me. And we get the Revo and another deliberation, which was really fun as well, where Jervis also like just keeps on saying, oh yeah, we should go to rocks, when he has the immunity necklace around his neck. And then yeah, the rock draw, which was fun, but again, Katie getting rocked out was just kind of eh. We do get Tyson getting a bit cocky right afterwards, which was also really fun. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the entire tribal. And again, I think this is worthy of being number 5. It's just such a fun tribal to watch. Again, I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not super eventful for the season as a whole, as Hayden and Sierra, the next 2, booted anyway. But it's still fun rides. That's why it's here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4. We have a tribal from Survivor, Millennials versus Gen X. And guess what? We have another rock draw here. We have the Final 10 Tribal Council, where Jessica gets rocked out of the game. And yeah, I do think this is a bit of a step up from the Blood versus Water rock draw, as we obviously came into this tribal with a 5-5 split. David and Zeke both led their alliances. After Zeke left David's alliance and gathered all of the outsiders to form his own group of 5, So David has an idol, and coming into tribal, he decides that he's going to act like a dick to everyone so that they would potentially put the votes on him and he can successfully play the idol on himself. And I mean, him being a dick did kind of work in a way. I mean, Brett and Zeke did get really upset at him. That led to some arguments. That was something. But obviously it didn't change who they were voting for. But yeah, we get to the votes. David gets up to play his idol, but Adam heard Sunday tell Hannah that they were going to vote for Ken. So David ends up playing the idol on Ken, obviously incorrectly. And I still don't understand why Adam actually believed this. Like, why do you think that, like, Sunday just saying Ken's name out? Like, why would that actually be their real plan? And you can even tell that obviously Hannah didn't believe it. So it's like, why did Adam believe it when he heard it secondhand instead of the person who was actually told this information? So yeah, I mean, the votes go on Hannah and Zeke, and we get a revote where Will considers flipping, but didn't because he was expecting Adam or Jessica to flip, especially Jessica, because she was very visibly freaking out at this point of the tribal. But somehow we get another tie and no one flips. And again, we have Will and Jessica still freaking out at the second deliberation, where people like David and Brett are just unwilling to change their votes. So we go to rocks. Again, 6 people drawing rocks here, and Jessica draws the black rock after being the one that was the most worried about going to rocks to begin with. So yeah, this is fantastic. This is easily my favorite rock draw, probably in the history of Survivor. But while the rock draw tribals for me are obviously fantastic, I do feel like the actual vote-offs, when they're like masterfully done like these next 3 that we're going to be talking about, are a bit more satisfying to me and much more enjoyable. So that's why this is here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3. We have what is probably my favorite vote out in the history of Survivor, and this comes from Survivor, David versus Goliath, and it is the John Hennigan blindside at the final 12. And yeah, I mean, this is easily my favorite vote out in the history of the series, but the tribal before the votes are cast is kind of just meh. Like, it's very obvious that the Davids and the Goliaths are separate. And there's like a little bit of arguing between Angelina and Christian, but for the most part, it's just kind of forgettable. And again, that's the main reason it's not number 1. I mean, from the point that the votes are cast on, it's masterful. It's such a brilliant tribal council. But that first half is just so much weaker than the 2 that are above it on the list. They have to put it here. But let's talk about the actual tribal itself. So coming into this vote, we had 7 Goliaths and 5 Davids. Davey had an idol and Dan had 2 idols. Now, the move that ends up happening here, I do credit a lot to Nick. He was the one that had the social bonds that were able to get people to tell him that Christian was going to be the target for the night. Alec told him this. I believe Mike White also told him this. And he got hints from some other people as well, I believe. So using this information, he told Davey, who got more confirmation and eventually agreed to play his idol on Christian at Tribal. So that's a fun moment. He gets up, plays the idol for Christian. The Davids are shocked. Dan has an idol, and Angelina obviously knows it. Dan did agree to play it on her just in case. So Angelina goes and starts begging Dan for him to play the idol on her. And he does. And it's a fun scene. I mean, again, Angelina is such a fantastic character. I haven't really talked about her that much on this channel, but again, fantastic character. So then we get to the vote reveal, and it's I love the way they did this vote reveal too, where obviously it's 7 votes for Christian get nullified, 2 more for Angelina get nullified. So you're like thinking at this point, okay, there's no vote tribal council here, especially because the Davids were all acting as if they were screwed. I mean, Nick more so than anyone, even though his was like a bit overacting. Like I was thinking like, okay, he's playing this up for TV or something, which I mean, he was, but yeah, when the first John vote comes up, I just remember it being so incredible. And then the second vote for John comes up and he's voted out. There's just so many different reactions going on at this tribal at once, where we have elation from the Davids, we have sadness in Angelina, we have surprise from Allison. There's just so many different things going on here. It's so fantastic. But it's just a shame I couldn't put this at number 1. So at number 2, we have a tribal that's probably from my least favorite season that we're actually talking about in this video. But this is a tribal from Survivor Game Changers. We have the Malcolm blindside that occurred during the double tribal in episode 4, which I don't think is necessarily the most shocking result to come from this double tribal, but I do think the way we got there was just so ridiculous. So these 2 tribes were coming together to vote out one person here. We had Nuku tribe that had 6 people, and we had the Mana tribe that had 5 people. But on Mana, Ty found the idol. At tribal, we had Nuku trying to pick up Haley, while Mana tried to pick up JT, as they were the people who had the most connections with the other side. And again, the very, very beginning of this tribal is, again, not the best in the world, but it starts to get a bit crazy once JT gets up And being the game changer that he is, he decides to walk over to Brad Culpepper and tell him that they're voting for Sierra, and tells him to vote out Sandra. Which would have been perfect for JT's game, obviously, but of course, Mana people end up putting their votes on Malcolm, who's JT's closest ally. But yeah, I remember seeing this for the first time, and something that really did blow my mind at the time was just people getting up in the middle of tribal, going around, discussing the plan in the open. Again, we talked about this with the Julia vote earlier in this video, but I do feel like this tribal is much more exciting in the way that they do it, and also just because it was also just the first time. But yeah, when we get to the vote reveal, Ty gets up, plays his idol successfully on Sierra due to the information that Brad Culpepper got, and this leads to 6 votes from her getting nullified, and then we get the fantastic moment when the Malcolm vote comes out, and just the sense of dread on his face, and a lot of his alliance as well. It's really just such an incredible moment for me, and such a crazy way for Malcolm to go home so early in the game. Alright, now we're here. We're here at number 1, the number 1 tribal council in the history of Survivor for me is the merged tribal council of Survivor Cagayan, where Sarah gets blindsided. And this was my number 1 vote out for the longest time, pretty much up until the John Hennigan boot. And while I do think the John Hennigan boot beats it in terms of the actual vote result itself, I do think if we take the tribal as a whole, again, I do feel like this is number 1. So coming in this tribal, we had Apari, who had a 6-5 majority with Sarah as the swing vote. But she did feud a lot with Cass, who was also on her side. Now, once it became apparent that Sarah wasn't going to flip, Cass was approached by Trish to flip against Sarah. So there's that. Also, the minority here has 2 idols, where Tony and LJ have 1 each. So at Tribal, Tony decides to reveal his idol to the entire tribe and calls it Community Idol, causing Spencer and Tasha to switch their alliance's vote to the other one. So we get to the votes. The votes are cast. Tony gets up to play his idol and incorrectly plays it for LJ. Which, I mean, I love Tony, but this is a completely massive misread on his part. To think that the other one would be another big target. You would assume that the other one would be a smaller target to completely avoid an idol, but whatever. But then right after this, we get out of nowhere LJ pulling out his idol and playing it for Tony, which I get what he was doing. Obviously, he was doing this to build trust with Tony and his alliance, but it was dumb that he played it for Tony. I mean, Tony had no shot of going home at this tribal at that point. I mean, everyone already knew that he had an idol. They weren't going to put the votes on him. So it's just kind of dumb that LJ played the idol on Tony. And this tribal is just such a complete roller coaster where Tony and LJ both waste their idols here, and the first vote comes up, and it's Jeffra, and they think that they're screwed. Even up to the 5-5 point, where we have 5 votes Jeffra, 5 votes Sarah, they think they're screwed, and the last vote comes out, Cass's vote comes out, and Sarah is taken out of the game, which leaves half the tribe completely shocked. It leaves the other half cheering and praying and stuff. It's just such a fun moment. The moment that the Sarah vote comes out, it's probably the most emotion that was shown after a vote reveal on Survivor up to this point, and possibly ever still. And just in the immediate aftermath, we have like a lot of Tony and Jeffra cheering. We have the Apari Alliance trying to figure out who flipped. You have a 0% chance of winning the game. I mean, this tribal just has everything I love about Survivor. We have innovative gameplay and fun character moments from Spencer and Tony. We have dumb gameplay from Cass and LJ. We have a massive blindside for Sarah. I love this tribal, and it's really the most consistent one as a whole, so that's why it's here at number 1. So there we go. Those are my top 10 tribal councils in the history of Survivor US. And obviously there were some great ones that didn't make the cut, but this was a top 10. I had to cut some out anyway. So yeah, I will be doing more Survivor videos after this. Obviously, I will definitely be doing more ranking videos. I think a season ranking will definitely be coming up relatively soon. But that's it for this video. That's everything I have to say about all these tribal councils. Thank you for watching.